Yeah, well, every story is different. In my case, I think through most of my high school and much of my college, I believed that I would graduate and then go to law school and that I was going to be a lawyer. And I was a participant in academic debate, competitive debating, which I associated with law and with that idea of a career. But while I was an undergraduate at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, I changed to a communication major, and I just got really excited about the field, and I became a serious student for the first time in my life. It had always been about debate or music or whatever, but now suddenly it was about academics. And so during that 2 years, I decided really that I wanted to be a professor and I wanted to be in the field of communication, and so that's what I did. Well, I think debate and argumentation brought me, let's say, it gave me an association with the field. I knew people who were communication majors. I knew people who were communication faculty, and I think that drew me to the field in a sense. But what really led to my wanting to be a professor and an academic was that I just got excited by the subject, and this was after I began studying, And I think one of the things that attracted me is the intellectual diversity of the field. That it seemed like when I took courses, let's say in political science, I was learning about communication, or if I took a course in sociology, I was learning about communication, or in philosophy even, I was learning about communication. And so, but in the communication field was where all of these ideas came together. And that really, I think, I found that very stimulating and very interesting, and the field was sort of a mystery to me, like what does this all mean? So that's how I got it, I think, involved in it. Well, I think those are good descriptions. I think it is diverse. It is fragmented in many ways. And so what I find interesting is that it does seem to hang together around this idea of communication in some way. Why is it that all of these seemingly unrelated sorts of academic and professional interests have all come together in departments or schools of faculties of communication? And I think that it is. It has to do with communication as a kind of concept in society. In other words, that somehow we see communication as important. We see it as problematic in many ways, difficult, or a cause of problems, and so it as a kind of symbolic umbrella for all of these different pursuits, these different intellectual and professional pursuits. I think it gives the field a kind of significance, a kind of social significance, that we're all somehow about communication, right? Even though we speak all different academic languages and pursue all different interests, somehow that symbol of communication provides a kind of unity for the field. Yeah, so it is a way of trying to make sense of the diversity of the field, and yet its unity around the idea of communication. And so, I begin with the fact that there were a lot of ideas about communication before there was a field of communication. that the term communication theory didn't come into use until the mid-20th century, and by that time there were already many theories of communication, and but there was no sense of communication as a field. And I think that the impetus to seeing it as a field had to do with what I was speaking about a minute ago, which is this sense of the importance of communication in society, that throughout the early decades of the 20th century, that there was a growing interest in communication, not just academically, but in society. There was this sense of the new media, the power of radio and propaganda and advertising, the development of new industries and professions around that, and just a sense that that society runs on communication, and that we need to do it better, right? Was a kind of growing interest, and in the period immediately after the Second World War was one in which the idea of communication had particularly great power. I mean, as a concept of how the world could come together and not be at war, right? That the communication is a kind of an alternative to war. And so it was in that atmosphere that the field of communication sort of was created. And I believe it was created in response to that practical concern with communication in society. And so the field of communication was created, but there was no communication theory at that time. There were just all of these ideas that were all over the place, right? But I think that what happened was that these ideas were sort of gathered together, and they were called communication theory. And so to understand that field, I mean, there are very diverse ideas, very different intellectual styles, from psychology, from philosophy, sociology, anthropology, from all over, right? Linguistics, these ideas about communication. And so the argument that I make is that to understand the field, we need to understand how all of these different ideas relate to the practical concerns about communication in society. Because I believe that in a sense, all of these theories were created to respond to communication as a practical problem in some sense. And so to make sense of the field, what I've tried to do is to make sense of how all of those different theories of communication speak to practical problems. And that was the motivation for creating this kind of model of the field, in which I distinguish seven different intellectual traditions, and try to show how each one of those traditions is relevant to a certain practical way of looking at communication, a certain kind of communication problem. So that's the basic idea of the meta model.